Hey there, welcome to Incorruptible Massachusetts. Our goal here is to help people understand state politics, to investigate why it is so broken, to imagine what we could have here in Massachusetts if we fixed it, and to report on how you can get involved. I am, as always, joined by my inimitable co-hosts, Jordan Berg Powers. You want to introduce yourself?
My name's Jordan Berg Powers. I use he, him, and I have 11 years experience in progressive politics in Massachusetts.
Jonathan Cohn.
Jonathan Cohn, also he, him, based out of Boston, and have 8 years. And I've experience with progressive issue and electoral advocacy here, and we're nearing the 8-year anniversary of my moving here.
All right.
August 1st.
And I am Anna Callahan from Medford, she, her, been around doing some state level stuff for a couple of years at least. So today we are going to talk about progressive revenue. But before we do that, we're going to remind you all that we are going to be doing a live broadcast of the podcast this Saturday, July 24th at 11 a.m. on the Boston Common. It's going to be super fun. And just to let you know how fun it's going to be, we are going to have a limerick contest on Twitter. We hope you'll all join in. It's pretty fun. If you want to have your limerick read on air on Saturday, then you can just tweet it out with the hashtag I am July 24, and we will put that out on Twitter so you know. I'm just going to go ahead and read one that we wrote in like 5 minutes with some of my volunteers from Incorruptible Mass. So here goes our first limerick. My bill just went into committee. We all know it's going to be shitty. We can't see their votes or even the notes. It will never get passed. What a pity. So, it doesn't take but 5 minutes to write one of these, probably less. That was maybe 2 minutes. It's pretty fun. So we look forward to hearing what you have to say on that point. And by the way, any short poem in any language is also invited. We would love to hear those as well. Okay, so first of all, we're going to kick this off by mentioning the fact that there is a $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill at the national level. It has a lot of things in it, some great stuff, pre-K, personal time off. They tried to fit in the PRO Act. There are a lot of things, a ton of things trying to fit into this bill. And what's probably going to kill most of those things is pay-fors. And, at the national level, when you are the part of the government that literally creates all dollars that exist in the world, there is no reason for pay-fors. No reason for pay-fors. Do you guys have any thoughts on this?
It reminds me on the federal level, it's always funny to me when politicians start talking about the deficit, because anytime any politician invokes the deficit, it's always as a smokescreen to talk about whether or not they want something. You never talk about the deficit if you want something. Most of the politicians who are perfectly happy to spend like large sums of money on weapon systems that don't even work will never invoke the deficit as a consideration of whether or not we can purchase additional weapon systems. But when it comes to things that might actually help ordinary people, do we really have the money? And so that's always just a very striking contrast. And the other initial thing I'll comment from following kind of the recent debates is how just kind of pathetic it is to me that part of that kind of mediocre bipartisan infrastructure deal is getting rocky because Republicans don't agree with the idea of using increased IRS enforcement of rich people as a pay-for. It's like, you're just admitting that you support tax evasion by rich people.
Yep.
Got it.
I mean, weapons and tax cuts for the rich are the typical ones that nobody ever asked how we're going to pay for those.
Exactly.
I mean, it's also, we could, if people were really concerned about paying for things, then you would tax rich people, right? Like we could figure out, it's not that complicated to figure out where the money is for all of these things that we would like to spend it. It's going into space right today with Jeff Bezos and all these rich people. So we could just we could close all these loopholes tax rich people, and then we would have money, right? Like it's not that complicated at any level of government. Where we should be doing as more and more of our hard work and the time and hours that we put into the economy gets siphoned off to rich people's bank accounts, we know exactly where to go for the pay for.
I love that framing of it. It's like, where is the money in the economy? Like, it's a simple question. The money in the economy is in the bank accounts of the uber wealthy. So that's where we should tax it.
It reminds me as well, and thinking of even about like taxation, tax enforcement stuff, is like, you're trying to look after the missing money. Should we go to like people who are receiving government benefits and might have received slightly more, or the guy who just took a joyride into space?
Yeah, right. And has paid less taxes.
Exactly.
Has paid less taxes. Maybe we should figure out what happened with that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It is. I always, one of the things, because there was a big push in Massachusetts to try to go after poor people for the so-called money that they were losing. And one of the things is I would tell people is I will take seriously that Massachusetts cares about its tax revenue when it starts going to all the boardrooms of the tax breaks it gives to people and starts asking them to account for all the water bottles and all the things that they're doing with their money, right? Like all those tax cuts, when Fidelity's tax cut, when we start knocking on Fidelity's door and and Suzanne Bump does an audit of the money that we're giving to Fidelity, then I will take seriously that they care about how our tax dollars are spent. But it's always poor people who they're just like, every dollar needs to be perfect.
Let's frame this conversation a little bit, because we just mentioned that at the national level, like, you don't got to worry about how to pay for it. You really don't. And that's a whole different discussion that people get very into. Right now, what we want to do is contrast the state government from the national government. So our state cannot print money. It does not create money. Like, our state, just like any of us, just like a company, has a budget, and it has to bring in revenue if it wants to be able to pay for anything, for roads and bridges, for education, for all of the things that we pool our money for. That money has to come from somewhere. And so the question is, like, how should we bring in more revenue for the state of Massachusetts?
Yeah, I just want to say that, like, one of the things that drove me the most crazy about President Obama is he would say, like, the federal government has to live within its means. And I would be like, the federal government, like, you and I can't print money. We don't have a money machine, but you can. Like, that's a silly argument. But also, like, I don't know. I didn't pay cash for this house. Like, I didn't balance my budget when every month I have this debt, right? It's a thing. And the state's the same. The state is the same in that way. It is like us, just as you said, Anna. It has to either pay its debts, which it has a big debt load. We have a big debt load, or it has to raise revenue, right? We got to figure out one way or another. And one of the things that I think people don't know about Massachusetts is we have this thing called a structural deficit, which is that we take in less revenue than we purport to spend. So what does that mean? It means we say as a community, we think that these things are worthwhile. Making sure the homeless can be housed, making sure we feed people, making sure poor people don't starve on the street, making sure we're doing things with our schools. And the revenue we bring in is less than the things that we have made promises to people, right? We count on people not accessing benefits. We count on people not using the full things that they're entitled to be able to balance budgets, or we borrow money. Right? Like, that's unsustainable. It's a terrible way to run it. But we have a structural deficit, whereas that we take in less than we should be spending, than we promise people would spend on them.
And this is a decision that our state reps make year after year.
Yes. Yeah. And a few years ago, I don't know what the structural deficit is now. A few years ago, it was 1.3 billion. So we were just, we were spending we promise people things, but we can't deliver.
And I would add, when thinking about the state, that I think is always surprising to people when you remind them of it, is how Massachusetts has a constitutional flat tax. So we recognize that flat taxes are a terrible idea. Like, who was the
Herman Cain.
Like the 999, right? Of basically having like a flat 9% tax, right? We recognize that whenever we see discussion on the federal level of a flat tax, we'll recognize that's terrible. That's terribly regressive. We need, because we've long since had a graduated federal income tax. But in Massachusetts, we still have, because of what happened 100 years ago when they authorized the existence of income taxes at all and chose to leave out any type of graduation for it, we have a constitutional flat tax.
And there are over 30 other states that have progressive taxes.
Yeah, in their state revenue, right? So this is on income, not to mention how, also we just don't, we like, this is also income, right? We're not even talking about wealth, which is another way that people generate things. So it is bonkers. We think of Massachusetts as a progressive state, but we have a regressive taxation system. The more that you have, the less we ask of you. What is it? Like, think about that. Think about that for a second. You're a poor person. We ask more of you. The state requires you to give in more than somebody who has plenty, that's overabundant, right? We're asking less of that person, even though they require more of the services. They require more of the protection, right? The protection goes for them to protect their wealth, their privilege, those things. They use more resources. They use more roads for whatever. They use more infrastructure. They use more electricity, right? The things that generate income for them, they require more services than we do. And yet they pay less of it.
I was just talking to somebody on the phone who said, oh, but isn't Massachusetts doing a lot better than most other states? And like, we are not. In fact, even our capital gains taxes, when you talk about, income tax and you're mentioning wealth tax, well, wow, that would be a dream. But capital gains tax, this is income people bring in that is not earned. It is income that people are not working for. They don't have to spend a minute. It happens while they're sleeping. And we have very low taxes on that income. We allow wealthy people to simply just get wealthier without taxing them in the way that other states do. And Jonathan, you had a great, you were talking about the different percent of income.
Yes, so there's this great graphic from Mass Budget, shout out Mass Budget, from 2018, where they look at the percentage of personal income paid in state and local taxes by different income brackets. And by their calculations, which I think they credit the information to the Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy, finds that the bottom 20% of Massachusetts of taxpayers, residents, pay about 10% of their total income in state and local taxes, and that's a mix of sales and excise taxes, property taxes, and income taxes. And the top 1%, which would be people making more than $680,000 in that year, 6.8%. So they actually pay a smaller share of their total income in taxes, which is striking when you realize that, because when we have that combination of a flat income tax rate, as well as kind of the way that kind of property taxes and sales taxes will hit people on the lower end more, we're letting that top 1% get away with a lot, and get away with paying kind of a lot less than they really should in the state. It also reminds me of although we'll be having a slightly more graduated system, fingers crossed, if the Fair Share Amendment passes next year on the ballot, to have a 4% surtax on income above $1 million. It's good that the legislature made the right call about putting that on the ballot. But it's been disappointing to see the legislature in recent years reject efforts to tax unearned income more, because unearned income is predominantly something just for the highest tax brackets. There's another thing from just last year from Mass Budget that noted if we raise the tax on unearned income to 9%, that's not really affecting anyone in the bottom 80% of the of earners in the state, because it's like, it was funny to watch legislators talk about the need to protect, basically to protect the working class people who have like that much money in capital gains income in Massachusetts.
This is kind of a legislating thing, right? This is like those weird, convoluted, illogical pieces of logic that they use to try and defend their positions on things.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, and I think let's just talk about what that feels like for most people. So in Massachusetts, regular people feel overtaxed, even as actually Massachusetts has moved away from the so-called taxachusetts and moved right into the middle of taxation. And the reason is that for regular people, especially people who are struggling, Massachusetts asks more of them than we do rich people, right? So the burden of keeping the state afloat is on the backs of people who can least afford it. I mean, think about it. That's like such a bonkers thing. And so that's where a lot of that mistrust, that frustration, that feeling like people are getting one over you comes from. It comes from that direct feeling that people who can afford to do space as fun get to do whatever they want. And regular people are struggling to figure out how to pay their next bill, and the government is feeing them to death, right? We have a fee for this, we have a fee for that, we have a fee for this. In my dream, like we're not just having progressive taxation for income. Like your speeding ticket should be progressive. Your the things that you do, and there are countries that do this, right? Like the more you have. Finland, I think it is. Yeah. So the more that you have, the more that you should pay into the system, right? Like somebody who gets a ticket who can afford it should pay more than somebody who can't, right? Like there are ways, there are people who get caught in the criminal justice system because of fees, right? Like this is a system of oppression that people put in, and we should make all of those progressive. It should be based on what you can afford.
And you mentioned fees, and I wanted to bring up public banking. So it's kind of a wonky subject, I know, but basically, if you think about your city and all the potholes there are and all of the projects the city wants to do, what normally happens is cities will go to Wall Street. They'll go to Wall Street banks. They will borrow millions of dollars. And in order to borrow that money, they got to pay millions of dollars in fees and interest. Millions. And that money is leaving the state. That is our money. That is just getting, they're getting raked, or we are getting raked over the coals because these cities can't go anywhere else. And so millions of our tax dollars municipal tax dollars are just being sent away into Wall Street banks and into the pockets of the uber wealthy. Whereas our state legislature refuses to enact a public bank. And basically it's a no-brainer. All that would do is save all of our cities and towns millions of dollars. That's all. There's no real downside to having a public bank. And yet they will not pass that. I had a whole podcast on it, in season 1, if you want to go back and figure out why. But this is another piece of that puzzle that we should not be allowing that transfer of money up.
Just a quick thing back to the point about Finland. I was just fact checking that, and Finland does have that from a 2015 article in The Atlantic. Notes about the fine was so extreme because in Finland, some traffic fines, as well as fines for shoplifting and violating securities exchange laws, are assessed based on earnings. Exorbitant fines like this are infrequent but not unheard of. In 2002, a Nokia executive was fined the equivalent of $103,000 for going 45 in a 30 zone on his motorcycle.
But and we think that's a lot. But we think that's a lot, but that's pocket change for him.
Exactly, but that's the thing, that if you think about that, if a regular person might get like $100 fine, that actually would be probably about equivalent in impact on income for them as his $100,000 fine.
Yep. I just want to say again that I listened to that podcast about the public bank, and I just cannot encourage it enough. A public bank is one of the most important things that we could do as a state economically. There's just also really fun things we could do. Like we could give the benefit of the money back to tax to residents in Massachusetts. Like, a lot of times it goes back into the bank, but there's no reason we don't give that out as a dividend to publicly to citizens, right? Like there is, to people who live like in Alaska, right? So there's so many things, right? Imagine if your tax dollars went to pay for the roads and the bridges and the stuff in the town, and they financed that through the public bank, and then the benefit of that went back to you. That's a system that we could do tomorrow. Like it's done in other places. I think North Dakota has a public bank. We could do it tomorrow if the legislature were serious about caring for regular people.
That's right. And let me bring up one more. I'm just going through my pet policies, right? You know, we pass a Medicare for all style single payer system here in Massachusetts. And I was just kind of looking at the stats. There was a great study done, and it would save about over 15% of our current spending on healthcare in the state. It would save $21 billion. I believe that's over 10 years, but don't quote me on that. So people ask like, oh, well, you know, how can you pay for it? You know, that's pie in the sky. It is not. It's not only something that would benefit every person in Massachusetts to be able to go to the doctor. Imagine going to the doctor and never having to worry about paying a bill, never. And having all your medical expenses completely regular and lower than what you're paying now. That is what that solution is. And it would save our state money. Our state government would also save money. I mean, it is a total no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, just to think about all your, again, where we're spending, you know, unlike, you know, whenever we do spending as a state or think about spending as a country on education, the part that we always miss is we just do total dollars, but a good percentage, anywhere, depending on the study, you see 20 to 40% of the dollars we spend on education goes to private health insurance companies, right? We're paying for healthcare for teachers. So think about this. So like, we think of it as dollars spent in the classroom, but that's not right. When you take out healthcare spending, we're spending like not much better than a developing country on education. If you think about all the money that gets siphoned off to things that aren't actually helpful to kids. Now, a healthy teacher is helpful to kids. I guess I should reframe that. But if we had single payer, that is a cost that would come out of your municipal government, would come out of our state government, out of our federal government, and go to where it belongs. And it would obviously lower the cost, as Anna has said, because we would be spending less and less going to all the ways that we misspend on health insurance, as well as having outcomes that, you know, would be better. Like when you got sick, you could go to the doctor.
Yeah.
Imagine.
All right, what are some of your other pet revenue dreams? Things we should already be doing if only our state legislature actually cared about us.
One quick thing I'll just give a quick shout out to that's had some organizing locally on, and the state needs to effectively authorize municipalities' ability to do it, is taxing high-end real estate transactions.
Oh yeah.
Because that would be a good way of raising money for affordable housing, and help to curb speculation happening in some of the higher end real estate markets in the state. Like I can just see out of my window, like the One Dalton project in Back Bay, which like I don't know how many of those are not just like investment properties for people who don't live here.
Which is the other thing that you can't do, but should be able to do, which is tax. There should be an occupancy tax.
Yeah.
We should just tax at 90% or 99% apartments, condos, things that are left empty, right? Like if they're just sitting around, you know, it hurts us all.
With people.
Well, that's what it would do. It would force you to fill with people, right? Like it would take those those places that are just left empty and force people to occupy them with someone. Right. So it doesn't mean that you can't rent out. It just means that like you can't leave it empty for the purposes of leaving it empty as an investment property, which is what a lot of happens downtown. It's just places to sit money. They don't even care if they lose money on it because it's safer than whatever government they're trying to hide the money from. Yeah. There is so much we could be doing to tax people who have a much. I'll just say the last one for me is corporations themselves. So there's a few things that we do poorly around taxing corporations. The first is we also have sort of a flat tax on corporations, and there is a minimum tax that you're supposed to pay. That's like, I think it's just a couple $100. It's nothing.
Yeah.
And we could make that. We could make that based on your profits. We could tier it. So if you had lots of profits, we could ensure that you're paying a minimum tax to Massachusetts to say, like, it doesn't matter how many loopholes you have. It doesn't matter how well you try to get your fee down. You have to pay this no matter what. And we could keep it the same for small businesses who we obviously think we want to support and be helping and protecting. And then the other thing we could be doing is just generally taxing profits of corporations here in Massachusetts a little bit better. Instead, we continue to give tax cuts to them. Again, Massachusetts passed a tax cut that the federal government was like, wow, that's a tax, like even Trump tax cuts were like, this is too bonkers for us. We are going to raise taxes on this. And Massachusetts was like, let's lower the taxes on that. Our Democrats were to the right of Trump on taxing corporations, if you ever want to know like how bonkers our state is. So like there's just no tax cut for like corporations that this state won't give away. And meanwhile, like other places were just, like even Trump's federal government is like, this is extreme. Like we gotta rein this in. And so like that's just a place like we really don't, whenever we try to tax corporations, they always trot out these small businesses. And one of the things I think progressives as a movement have done poorly is we really haven't separated small businesses from large corporations. And like they have nothing in common with each other. They have no shared interests. And if anything, they are an impediment to your survival, right? Like Walmart and all of these places want to crush those small businesses. So
yes.
we have a vested interest in protecting them more so than than the Chamber of Commerce, which does not care about them, will never advocate for them. And so that's just a place that we should be separating people. And one of the ways we can make our values clear is through taxation. Right, we should make clear if you make a certain amount of profits, you pay more. End of story.
I love it. I think this is, we kind of scratched the surface here of how much our state is not doing what we need it to do. So thank you so much. I hope that we see everybody live in person on July 24th, this upcoming Saturday at 11 o'clock on the Common. We'd love to see you there. Till next week.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.